So today I'm going to be showing you how to graft in pattern. Now, a lot of the grafting techniques that are shown is the Kitchener stitch, which is used to graft in stockinette stitch. It's used often in socks and other things like that. But what about when you need to graft in other patterns like purl stitches and garter stitch? Because despite what we like to think, when we graft using a Kitchener stitch style, we're not creating one row, we're creating 2 rows. Well, today I'll show you how to graft in pattern with almost any type of pattern. Let's get right to it. For today's tutorial, I'm going to be grafting these 2 swatches together. Now, we have 5 different patterns on here. We have a garter stitch, stockinette stitch, seed stitch, reverse stockinette stitch, and another garter stitch. But this garter stitch is different from that one, as I've knit one and purled one, so that way they're 1 row off to show you the difference between grafting those 2 rows. When we're grafting in pattern, we have to remember that we're not making 1 row like we like to think. We're grafting 2 rows. So you cannot just do a straight Kitchener stitch or just the same knit pattern on both sides for garter, as it will just leave either a big gap or a big bunch of purl stitches. Now to start, today I'm using a contrasting color so you can see the stitches. Normally if I'm grafting, I will be using the same yarn that I knitted my piece with. That way it would blend in seamlessly, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing as the end result, so we're using the blue. So we're putting our wrong sides together and our needles both facing the same way. We are going to start with a garter stitch. Now this garter stitch, as you can see, we have the knit valley in front and a row of purl bumps on the back needle. So we're going to make purl bumps in the front stitches and a knit valley in the back. So to set up for this, we are going to start by going into the first stitch in the front needle, and we are going to go in as if to knit, and we're going to leave it on the needle. Pull the yarn through most of the way. You don't want to go too far to the end, but you want to be able to have enough. You want about 4 to 3 times the amount of yarn as the width of your project to make sure you have enough yarn for grafting. I prefer to use 4. Now for the back, we're going to go in as if to knit, pull it through, and we're going to keep that stitch also on the needle. Your setup is going to be different depending on what pattern you need to graft. This is specifically for this garter stitch, so you always want to make sure you're using the proper pattern you need to graft. So now that we're going to be creating this purl bump row and then knits in the back, to be able to fully make that garter go, we're going to go in as if to purl. We're going to slide that stitch off of the needle, pull our yarn through. For the first few stitches, you want to hold on to the tail so it doesn't slide through. And then go in as if to knit. And we're going to leave that stitch on the needle. And then we will go to the back needle. Go in as if to purl. Slide the first stitch off of the needle. Pull our yarn through. And then go in as if to knit. And we're going to leave that one on the needle. Now when you're doing your grafting, you generally work in groups of 2. Your setup is going to depend not on the stitch that you are currently going to take off, but on the stitch that you are working into for the second part. So because we're continuing in the stockinette, in the garter stitch, we are going in as if to purl, slide off, in as if to knit, keep that one on. And then we are going to go for the back needle. We're going to go in as if to purl, slide off, in as if to knit, and we're going to keep that stitch on the needle. So now we have a few of them now. We're going to continue in that same pattern. In as if to purl, slide it off, in as if to knit, keep it on, and move to the back. You want to make sure that when you're doing this, you are only working underneath the knitting needles. You do not want to go over top of the knitting needles. You always want to go to the under. So we're continuing as if to purl, slide off, as if to knit, keep on. And now that we've got a few stitches, we can start tightening up our gauge so that way it blends a little bit more seamlessly. It gets a lot harder when you're doing a whole row of tightening the gauge, so I suggest doing it every few stitches. And you want to make it to be about the same gauge that you were knitting in, so that way it appears to be seamless. Just slightly pull on each of the stitches that you just made to tighten or loosen the gauge. You don't want it too tight and you don't want it too loose. You want it to be about the same as you're knitting. So to continue, we're going to go in as if to purl, slide that stitch off, go in as if to knit. We're going to keep that one on. Pull our yarn through. And then to the back needle, in as if to purl, slide off, in as if to knit, and we're going to keep that one on. And as you can see, we are creating a garter stitch here. If we were to use regular Kitchener stitch, it would create a gap. Like there's our knit valley and there's our purl bump row. Kitchener would just create solid knit valley and it would look awkward and it wouldn't create that nice seamless finish. So now we're finishing up our garter on this part, going in as if to purl, slide off, and then we are going to set up for our stockinette stitch. We're going to go in as if to purl, and we're going to keep that one on. Pull our yarn through. And then we're going to go in as if to purl, slide off, and now to set up for the stockinette in the back, we're going to go in as if to knit and keep that one on. And now we're at the point in our pattern where we are doing the more traditional Kitchener stitch. So we're going to go in as if to knit, slide off, in as if to purl, keep on, move to the back, we're going to in as if to purl, slide off, in as if to knit, keep on. It's important to remember while we're switching here that the setup for the next stitch is entirely dependent on what that stitch is. So we're switching patterns, so that's why our setup is changing and our stitches are changing. So when we go to set up a knit stitch in the front needle, we are always going to go in as if to purl into that first stitch. If we're setting up for a purl stitch in the front, we're always going to go in as if to knit. In the back, it's going to be reversed for setting up for a purl on the back. We are going to go in as if to purl, and setting up for knit in the back, we are going to go in as if to knit. This is why with the garter stitch, we do the same setup and the same takeoff on both sides, but with the stockinette we do the front and the back differently. So it really depends on what the needles are in the pattern of how you're going to set it up. I know it's a little confusing. I'll have it all written down on my blog. You can go check that out. The link will be in the description. So let's continue with our stockinette stitch right now. We're going to go in as if to knit, slide it off, in as if to purl, keep it on. Now since we're knitting in the back, we're going to go in as if to purl, slide it off, in as if to knit, keep it on. And we will just continue that same knit, slide off, purl, keep on, purl, slide off, knit, keep on for these last few stockinette stitches. My apologies. Tightening our gauge in our grafted row as we go. That way it's not as difficult to do, and we can start to see that if the colors were matching, this would look almost like it was just a solid piece of knitting. And I say almost because there's going to be a half stitch jog in any of your grafting work. However, it's not very noticeable. So now we're getting to the more difficult portion. We're getting into the seed stitch. So right here we have a purl bump, so we're going to need to do a knit stitch right there. And here we have a knit valley, so we're going to have to do a purl stitch right there. And in the next stitch, it switches. So it's going to be a lot of back and forth, but I wanted to show this. That way, if you come across it, you have something a little bit to refer back to. It can be a little bit confusing, so definitely make sure that you like this video and bookmark it so you can come back to it. So we're going to go in as if to knit, slide off. Now we're setting up for a knit, so we're going to go in as if to purl and keep that one on. And we're going to go in as if to purl, slide off. That finishes up our stockinette. And now, because we need a purl bump there, we're going to go in as if to purl for the setup. And now we're going to pull it through. Keeping that stitch on the needle. It is a lot of back and forth with the seed stitch. So now we're going to go back to the front. And we're going to go in as if to knit, slide off, and now we're setting up for a front purl stitch. So we are going to go in as if to knit and keep that one on. Then we'll move to the back needle, go in as if to knit, slide off, and then in as if to knit, keep on. So that's going to create the purl bump in the back, and it's also going to set up for the knit in the back for the next stitch. So we're going to go in as if to purl in the front, slide that stitch off, gotta make sure your work keeps on going up to the ends of your needles. And then we're going to go in as if to purl to start the setup for the next knit stitch in the front. Pull our yarn through, go to the back, in as if to purl, slide off, that'll create that back knit. In as if to purl, keep on. And as you can see, we're now starting to get the back and forth knit purl pattern that the seed stitch has. So, Go in as if to knit, slide off, in as if to knit, keep on. Now, this is a lot similar to 1-in-1 ribbing. I did not do 1-in-1 ribbing on this video, but I will link in the back in my blog how to do grafting with 1-in-1 ribbing, because that is also a lot of back and forth remembering. So I'm going to finish up these seed stitches, and as we can see, we came a little bit of the way, so we're going to just finish tightening up our gauge a little bit, making sure that it's tight enough to look like the rest of the knitting, but not too tight that it creates a weird pucker, because we want it to look as seamless as possible. So it is a little tedious. Just take your time. It's well worth the effort when you get it done properly. And so you want to pull up on each time that yarn crosses from front needle to back needle. You want to pull up on each one of those threads to get through. And it is definitely a little tedious. And so we're almost to our reverse stockinette. So we're going to go in as if to knit, slide off, in as if to knit, keep on, in as if to knit, slide off, in as if to purl, keep on, because now we are setting up for our reverse stockinette. So this is going to be a lot like the stockinette stitch, but it's backwards. So we did a purl, slide off on the front needle, knit, keep on, then we're doing a knit, slide off on the back needle, set up with a purl, keep on. And now this is going to create a knit row on the wrong side, and it's going to create 2 purl rows on the front. And it'll be easier to see that we in fact do create 2 rows when grafting instead of 1. It's hard when you're grafting stockinette because you really only see 1 row. But especially in garter, you see multiple rows. Which is why grafting in pattern, we have to do a specific way to be able to get it looking properly. So I'll just tighten these up. And as we can see, it's really starting to show that it is looking in pattern. It's a little jarring because it's not the same color, but we can easily see the stitches. So now we are continuing in our reverse stockinette. I'm going to go in as if to purl, slide it off, go to the next stitch, go in as if to knit, keep that one on, go to the back needle, go in as if to knit, slide off, go in as if to purl, keep on. Now we're just going to continue through this until we get to our next garter stitch. Now this garter stitch is done using all purls instead of all knits, so it shows how to do garter when you're starting with the purl bump row in the front and the knit row valley in the back. So we're going to have to put knits in the front and purls in the back. So let us finish up these 2 last of our reverse stockinette stitch and go in as if to purl, slide off, and then I'm going to go in as if to purl to set up for our garter. Then in as if to knit in the back, slide that stitch off, and then go in as if to purl, and keep that stitch on. And now for the rest of this swatch, we're on the first stitch in the front needle, we're going to go in as if to knit, slide off, in as if to purl, keep on, and then go to the back needle, and we're going to go to the back needle, and then we're going to go in as if to knit, slide off, in as if to purl, keep on. So for garter stitch, you're going to be doing the same motion on the front needle and the back needle to create those two differing rows. So in as if to knit, slide off, in as if to purl, keep on. Then we're going to go to the back needle, in as if to purl, slide off, in as if to knit, slide off, in as if to purl, keep on. And we're going to continue the same way for the last few stitches. And then when we get to our last two stitches, we're just going to finish it off by knitting, going in as if to knit and sliding off. And now we are going to be adjusting our gauge throughout the project. This is why it's helpful to go through as you graft it together. To create a more seamless look. Just gentle tugs. You don't want to pull too tight. You don't want to pull too loose. You don't want to keep it too loose. You want to go stitch by stitch, being very gentle and trying to make it look as much as like the rest of your knitting. And once again, I know this is pretty complicated to remember, so I will have a link down to my blog where I'll have it written down. I'll also, here's a brief flash. You can also screen grab this right here for just the general rules for a little reminder card. If you found this helpful, please like this video, and if you'd like to see more knitting techniques, please subscribe. So we're just finishing up adjusting our gauge. And there you have it. We grafted in pattern. Now if I had used the same color for the grafting, it would be almost seamless. There's a little half a stitch jog, but it'd be almost seamless. You can use this for cowls, headbands, socks, really anything that you would want to have that seamless look. Now if I were to finish this off, normally I'd weave in the ends, and then it would look like one continuous piece of knitting instead of two grafted pieces. Now it is pretty tricky. If you'd like to have written instructions that you can refer back to, please visit my blog, which is in the description link below. Thank you very much for watching. Happy knitting!